Well, hello and welcome to In the Growth Space. I'm your host, David McGlennon, and I'm really glad that you're here today. You know, In the Growth Space is a podcast that covers growth from a number of different angles. We talk about growth from a company perspective. We talk about growth from a leadership and career perspective. And we also talk about growth from a personal perspective. And so today's episode is really all about growth from a personal perspective, but it's from a perspective that will influence everything else you do, your leadership, your company growth, and I think really even your relational growth. So we're talking with a leader and an author today, Randy Gravitt. And Randy is actually the business partner of Mark Miller, who was on the podcast twice last season. I teased him and said that he's going to have to write another book to catch up with Mark. But Randy has written a new book called Winning Begins at Home, and it is a fantastic book. It is a fantastic premise. It's actually written as a parable, and I really love this approach. And we have a great conversation. And I think that because we're living in a world that's characterized by a lot of technological advances and virtual work environments and the boundaries between our work life and our family life and our personal lives really get blurred. This is such an appropriate topic, and it's such a needed topic, I think. You know, for me, I've worked at home or from home for a number of years. Actually, probably close to 20 years I've worked from home. And so I know what it's like to balance and struggle and integrate the home life versus the work life. It's a struggle, and I think it's a daily battle, and it's never been more prevalent than today. So we're gonna have a great conversation about this topic, because I think that our home life, and Randy, this is his premise in his book, that our home life really drives the rest of our life and the rest of our career, our leadership. And I think that it's something that, whether we realize it or not, we have to begin at home. And so this conversation is a great one. Randy has worked with a number of different companies, a number of different organizations, Chick-fil-A being one. And then the Pittsburgh Pirates right here in Pittsburgh, he worked with them as well. He's an author, he's a speaker, he's an executive coach, and he encourages leaders to really reach their potential and unlock their potential. And so in 2014, he founded the company Lead Every Day, and he serves as the CEO, the Chief Encouragement Officer. He is such a delight to talk with. He's a father. He's a grandfather. As he said, he says he's a randdad. And I just absolutely love this conversation. I think you will too. So let's go ahead and get into this conversation with Randy Gravitt right now. Well, hey, Randy, welcome to the podcast, man. I am really excited for this conversation today.
Yeah, I'm glad too. Thanks, David. I appreciate you having me on. Thanks for all you do to serve leaders. It's awesome, man. I'm honored to be here.
Well, I'm really, really grateful. First of all, I got to say, I love your new book. We're going to talk about that here in just a minute, Winning at Home. And I love the fact that you used baseball as the foundation for this story, and we'll get into the context of the book. But I'm a huge baseball fan. Before we hit record, we were talking about the Pirates. You actually worked with the Pittsburgh Pirates for a little while. I'd love to hear that story. How did that happen?
Yeah, the hometown team there for you. That's great.
Yeah.
And they're doing okay this year. That's good.
Yeah, not bad.
It was kind of a wild story. I had been writing a blog. This was back probably 2010 or so. It's been 15 years ago. Anyway, I was writing this little daily blog, and one morning in the spring, I get an email from Clint Hurdle, the manager, and he's like, "Hey, we're using your blog in our organization," and I'm like, "What? Who is this?" And so anyway, he said, "If you ever need me, call me." And and I email him back and just say, thanks, I'm glad to hear it. I'd written some stuff on team building, whatever, and they had just shared it with all their organization. Anyway, so I just put my number in there and said, if you need me, call me as well. And, thought nothing of it. And then 10 minutes later, the phone rings and he said, hey, I see you every day on the blog. Thought I'd put a name with a face. And the next thing you know, I'm running around the outfield shagging fly balls in here in Atlanta when they had a series in town, and spoke to their coaches, and that went well. And so spent some time with them every year in spring training, and then a couple of series a year I'd go and just hang out with their coaches and try to encourage them. And that was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was
love it.
But, so that's how I got connected to those guys. It's just sort of a random thing, but Clint's become a dear friend. He's amazing. He's a great guy.
Yeah. So you've been to the Berg, you've been to PNC Park. I know we have a lot of listeners here in the Pittsburgh area, and so they'll be excited to know that you've worked with the hometown team.
We were going to film a video series. This was wild on teams. And my friend Mark Miller, I think Mark's been on your show as well. And anyway, Mark and I was going to film this stuff for Chick-fil-A. I'm doing a lot of work with Chick-fil-A, trying to help them with their teams. And so, crazy story. We called the ballpark here in Atlanta. Thought it'd be kind of a cool setting to film this team series in a ballpark, and they just weren't accommodating, and it didn't work out. So I called Clint and I said, hey, would it be possible to come to PNC? And he's like, dude, we're in Milwaukee this weekend. You can have the whole ballpark.
You can have the park.
Really gave us the park, and we were able to do some filming. And
that's so cool.
It's pretty amazing. So our video series actually was our team series was actually filmed there in your ballpark in Pittsburgh. So love the people of Pittsburgh. It's an incredible place. It's great.
Oh man, that's so cool. That's so cool. Well, hey, Randy, I'm so grateful that you've taken time to share with us here today. Just some thoughts. We're going to talk a little bit more about your book, but I guess let me start here with the premise of the book, because it's entitled "Winning Begins at Home," and home doesn't get the airwaves that a lot of topics do. It's really, so many times in business and in leadership, we're talking about hitting goals and setting goals and, hitting numbers and metrics and success as it relates to business. But we don't talk a lot about success as it relates to home. So why is this topic, and why is this so important for us as leaders to really begin with home in mind?
Yeah, well, when we were younger, I mean, I'm an old guy now. When we were younger, everybody talked about, what are you going to do from 9 to 5? That was the job day, basically. And everybody's thinking about their work, and it's so easy to still think about our work. But I started thinking, okay, what happens outside of work? And I called it what happens from 5 to 9. I think what happens from 5 to 9, really, that's where our life is fulfilled. I mean, it's like, good. And home looks different now than maybe it's ever looked before. I mean, it looks different for all kinds of people, all kinds of situations. But here's what I know. Every single person cares about their life outside of their work. And so I just kept talking we do a lot of executive coaching and training and help companies build leadership cultures. I kept talking to all these executives and owners and business leaders who were saying to me, we're doing pretty good at work. I mean, pretty good's not enough. We're trying to help them chase high performance. But what happens is if we're not careful, we will build a place at work where we're like, kind of, it becomes our altar. That's where we put our affection and our attention and all that stuff. And if we're not careful, the stuff that matters most can become almost leftover. And so I kept hearing leader after leader say, I'll summarize it this way. If you win at work and you lose at home, you still lose. That's what they were telling me. So I thought, okay, we're creating all this content for these businesses and companies and training to help them with culture and engagement and execution, all those things in the workplace to help them move the bottom line and to build leaders and all that stuff. And that's we love that. That's what we do with our lives, basically. Yeah. But I thought, okay, where's the content helping leaders outside of work? And so that's where the book came from. I thought, well, Mark and I are content creators and thought leaders. We thought let's try to put some stuff out there to help people outside of work. And really the idea for me was could we have a blueprint to build a great family? Can we have a blueprint to build a life outside of work? Whether we're even thinking about family, maybe we're talking about fitness or all these, our finances. There's a lot of things that happen outside of work, but the book is primarily targeted to building a family. And, I like that mindset. So yeah, we created some content, and hopefully it's out in the wild now. So
it's out in the wild. That's right.
Just released it a few weeks ago. And so we're excited about it.
Well, I think one of the things that attracted me to the book and this message, quite honestly, Randy, is that it was a tension that I grappled with when I started my company. I was in a very successful company. We were chasing high performance, and yet there was something missing. I was missing some things at home, and I never had a blueprint for my home life. My dad grew up in an era where it was all about the 9 to 5, and actually he was an entrepreneur. So it was really like 9 to 9 and there wasn't much room for, anything else. And so I never had a blueprint for that 5 to 9, as you called it. And so I know that it's a really important message, and it's an especially important message now too, I think, because of the generational differences that are in the workforce today. There are, guys like you and me who grew up in a certain era where it really was a lot about work. And then we also have the younger generation who are recognizing that that's not all there is. So I guess, how do you balance that tension between, maybe even just the generations and the mindsets that are around those? I'd love to hear kind of your perspective on that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love the next generation. I spend a lot of my time with young leaders as well.
I love that.
Wherever we go, I love that idea that you bring up about the next generation, because I think they're so interesting. They're interested in what they're trying to do. They're trying to learn. They're trying to grow. And if you really stop and listen to them, you end up learning a lot yourself, and which I love that part. Yeah. But I think they have pushed back against we're going to work 100 hours a week and just see what happens. And I'm all for hard work. I think that's great, but I think there's this other side of our life, like we're talking about, and if we're not careful, we can even go to work and then come home and be at home and still be at work. Yeah. And I think there's this breaking line between work and home that they're pretty good with and have taught us a lot about. And just being able to be, I'll come off the next generation a little bit here. I think it's for all generations. If that temptation to be at home and not really be there. And I was sharing with somebody just a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about this concept, and you go into a restaurant now, you see people sitting around a table, and you can make an assumption they're a family. It's kids, mom and dad kind of thing. They're sitting there. And so many times I see them now, David, they'll have phones all around the table, and they're not really even with each other when they're with each other. And, I told somebody, unless they're texting across the table, there's no connection there at all. Right. And so I've used the phrase lately, proximity is not the same thing as intimacy. And what I mean by that is you can live together and not really be connected together. And so I think it's a huge temptation, especially for executives. You're carrying a lot of weight. You got responsibility at work. You're chasing all these high performance goals. And then you maybe even go to the ballet recital and you miss the recital, or you're at the little game, but you're still checking your phone and you're tethered to all that technology. I think it's dangerous. And so I just wanted to remind leaders, like we can have a different kind of life. We actually get to decide what we do with our time and what we do with our connection. And so I think the next generation has pushed us to think about that more, but I think they're challenged with it as much as old guys are. For me, it's a systemic kind of deal right now.
Well, and you used a word that I think I don't want people to miss. You said we can decide how we want to live our life. And I find this oftentimes with a lot of leaders, especially who maybe are sandwiched in the middle of an organization, that they don't think they have the agency to decide what they want out of life, what they want out of their own, career and leadership. But we do get to decide what life we want to have. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, making those decisions. Like, how do we decide how to live our lives and really integrate life and work?
That's great question, David. I would say that your boss, whoever your boss is, if we're in the middle of that organization, we've got a boss or a leader or somebody we report to, I think there's a good chance that they actually do want you to win outside of work. If you have that conversation with them, I think what you'll find is you'll discover most people understand that if things are good at home, you're actually a better employee. That's what the research would show, versus if you're bringing with you a mess from home and things are not good there, it's typically going to spill over into your work. And I think sometimes we make this assumption that they just want us to work. And you may work at a place where your leader just has the mindset of extracting value. They're not really thinking about your home life. And that's where I would say you get to decide who you work for. I mean, you really do. I mean, Henry Cloud, psychologist Henry Cloud, done a lot of great writing. One of the things he said, I thought was so good. He says, you are ridiculously in charge. And so you get to choose, there's our word, you get to choose who you work for and what you're doing with your time and your life outside of home. And so I would ask the leader to start with just a couple of places. What do you want? What do you want with your life? And what do you want at work? And if you think about it work first, what do you want? I would think about home first, but let's start with work. Because that may be the temptation here. What do I want? I want my boss to not be upset with me. I don't want to lose my job. I mean, I understand you got to make a living, but at the same time, do you really want to spend the next 30 years? Let's say a person's got a career in front of them. You want to spend the 30, you may have multiple jobs, but you want to go place to place where all you are is a number and people don't care about it. I mean, I don't think that's really what we want. And yet we get in this trap if we're not careful. And then we live somebody else's life. If you don't tell your time where to go, somebody else will. I'll tell you that.
I love that.
So
Yes.
I think we have to have that conversation with them, but ask yourself, what do you want and why do you want it? And then pull that back at home. And what kind of family do I want and why do I want it? And I think we can start with our what and why. That'll help us as we start making these choices, because there are some trade-offs. And you said it a moment ago, or alluded to it a minute ago, we're spending a lot of time at work and maybe not as much time at home. People talk to me all the time about, now that this book is out, like, can you really have work-life balance? And I'm not sure you can. I mean, the reality is you're going to spend more waking hours at work than you are at home, most likely.
Sure.
It goes back to what we were talking about a minute ago, though. I think the key is to be at home when you're home and to leave work at work. And actually, when you're at work, be at work. Don't take home to work. I mean, you probably knock out a lot more stuff and get it done. Then when you go home, you can have some freedom. But I think the lines get blurry. And frankly, a lot of us are working at home anyway. I mean, remote work and all that. So is there a doorway in your home? When you walk through that doorway, you can separate, like, I'm leaving this here and I'm going to be now in this spot. And then when I go to that other place, I'm going to go to work when I'm at work. And if you're going to an office, it may be a red light or a stop sign in your neighborhood or whatever, but there's that breaking point that we almost need a trigger to say, how do I get to a point where I can really go where I'm going? And then when I come back home, I'm at home.
Man, I love that idea and that tactic to kind of switch off, because you're right. I think there are so many people working at home or from home, and it's so hard to how do you walk out of your office into the family room and then make that switch mentally. And and with our devices these days, it's really hard to manage our focus. And so I think that's a great idea to be able to find that doorway, that stoplight, a stop sign or whatever, to be able to make that trigger. Let's talk for a second about the book, because we've been dancing around this idea of winning at home. And so you wrote this book about winning at home. And I love the way that you did this, Randy. You used a story format. And I love that, because in the story, I think we can immerse ourselves and we can see ourselves in the characters within the story. At least I know I did. As I was reading it, I'm like, oh yeah, I can relate to that. I can see that. And So, what was the inspiration for you to write the story in the first place, and maybe even in this format?
Yeah, well, I've actually written a couple other books, and I've used the parable format. I've really been encouraged through the years by John Gordon and Patrick Lencioni. John's actually a
Yes.
friend, and he's encouraged me. And then Mark actually, when he started writing his stuff, he did several parables back in the
Yeah.
day, and Ken Blanchard's stuff. Mark and Ken wrote, some The Secret together, which was really good.
Right.
I like that. I like that format. They connect with me. I'm actually a storyteller, and so I love the story. I just think there's an ability to create a concept or a framework, but to put a story around it to give some color to these characters. And I'm like you. I feel like I find myself relating to all the characters in the story in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And so you sometimes you write. I heard David McCullough. He's a historian, writes, and David McCullough said one time, somebody asked him, like, how do you get these books? And I mean, he writes his books are books compared to what I'm doing here. I mean, he's got these big, thick history books. And David said, I always just write the books that I would want to read. And so
Yeah.
that for me was, I'm like, okay, let me just write something that's simple. It's easy to read. You can read it in a couple of hours.
Yeah.
I like the idea of the story to give us a connection, but in the back of it, you saw, David, there's a 7-page activation guide. And
Love that.
I think ideas are great, but I believe we behave our way to high performance. And so it's not enough to have the idea. It's like, we've got to do something now with the idea. And so we put that activation guide. So anybody that reads the book is going to have a way to build a blueprint, basically to have the family that they want. And so that's in the back. And I think when you combine the ideas and the activation, you actually can have transformation that can happen. We've already began to hear people saying, this is changing the way I'm thinking about my family. And I think that's great. I mean, so that's where it started.
I really do love that, Randy. And I love the fact that you put that activation guide in the back, because there's so many times when I'll admit it, like I read a lot of books. I've read a lot of books, but taking that activation guide and actually giving some practical tactics on how to apply the principles that came out of the story really creates the transformation. And I think that that's what's so special about this book, is that you do that. And so you kind of begin with the end in mind. It's like, hey, if we're going to talk about this, we want to transform people's mindset and their behaviors around winning at home. And so if we're going to do that, we better give them some practical ways to apply the things that are in the book.
Yeah, I heard somebody say that a book is not about something, a book is for someone. And I thought that's just such a great reminder. I always tell myself, I do a lot of speaking to teams and organizations, do keynotes, all that kind of stuff. Every time I go, I always remind myself the audience is the hero. It's not about what I have to say. It's about what do they need to hear and what's going on with this group. And so can I start with, what do I want them to know? I mean, there are concepts, but what do I want them to know? But what do I want them to do? What do I want them to do? What do they need to do? And what do they need to feel? I mean, I ask myself those 3 questions: what do I want them to know? What do I want them to do? And what do I want them to feel? I want them to feel motivated. I want them to feel capable, and I want them to feel equipped. I mean, there's things I want them to feel as well, but I think the same thing happened when I wrote this book. I was thinking, a lot of people are winning at work. I mean, they really are. We work with lots of successful companies and a lot of successful teams and owners, whatever. But who's helping us win outside of work? That really was the question I was pondering, because to me, nobody ever taught us this stuff. You said it a minute ago, I wish somebody had written this for me 25 years ago.
Exactly.
37. We just
exactly.
37 years of marriage a couple of weeks ago. And you feel like, when we had kids, we had 4 daughters, and when they were little, I mean, you just honestly still in some ways, I feel like I'm making it up as I go, and
exactly.
I don't want that. I want it to be intentional and purposeful and something that we give some thought to. I will say one more word for that person who's listening, who might be thinking, well, Randy, you're an old guy. I think, David, you're the same way. Your kids are growing up as well,
Yep.
right? I mean,
Yep.
kids are growing up, and
Yeah.
you may be sitting there going, well, it's easy for you to go in one section of your house and come back in the other, and that all sounds great. But what do I do when I got little 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds and, a
Yeah.
baby in the home? I mean, it's just a different season.
Yeah.
And I would say this, it is a different season. I mean, when they're little, it's exhausting.
Yep.
It becomes much more emotional as they get older. I mean, it's physical when they're little. It's emotional when they get older. You know that.
Yep.
But here's what I would say. If I'm not careful, I could get behind the excuse of this season I'm going through, and I can't do what these guys are talking about. And here's what I've noticed through my career. Seasons, if I'm not careful, I'll just move season to season to season to season, and I'll make excuses all along the way. And seasons, David, become patterns if I'm not careful.
Right.
I want to make sure that I don't just, now it is hard when you're in a season, and I get that, and it may be different in different seasons, but I think we still have to focus on how do we do this, or if we're not careful, we'll get down the road. You'll be an old guy like me someday, and you'll go, I never paid any attention to this, and I think that's where your regret will end up.
Yeah.
They put that little disclaimer in there.
Yeah, no, I really love that, and I love the idea of looking at it from a season's perspective, because I think the other thing is that just because we're in a season doesn't mean that we can't think about these things. If you're listening and you're thinking, oh my goodness, we've got little ones, there's absolutely no way. Well, I think that you can do little things and ask yourself different questions. I mean, you're a coach. You know what it's like to be able to reframe something and ask a different question and ask, how could I do this? What might work? And when we do that, when we shift that perspective, it makes all the difference, because I think, you use in the book, the parable is around the idea of baseball, which I absolutely love. And I think if you think about the baseball diamond, if you're at home plate looking at the pitcher, that's a different perspective than if you're in center field and looking at home plate. And I think if we could just look at our life from a different perspective, it may help us to be able to find a way and find new ways to really apply what the principles that you're talking about and that you put into the story in this book.
Yeah, that's a great observation there. I think I've always thought about, I was a pitcher and an infielder, or a first baseman and an outfielder back in the day when I was playing ball. But the catcher, to me, has such a unique, in sport, any sport. I mean, if you like sports, the catcher has the whole game right in his lap there. Or if it's a football player in her lap. I mean, it's literally everything's in front of you there. And I like the home imagery there on a diamond, and in the book you'll get a taste of that, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think you contextualize these seasons, if we go back to that idea. Meaning, if I've got little ones, what does it mean for me to connect with little ones? I'm maybe reading bedtime stories and helping out with putting them in bed. I mean, whatever. It's just a lot of things there. When they get older, it's going to be a different. You're probably not sitting with your 14-year-old reading them bedtime stories. That's most likely not happening. But there needs to be a new way to connect there. And actually, years ago, when I was doing some stuff with the Pirates, and we talked about Clint Hurdle a minute ago, he had this thing I thought was really good. He had what they call, it's baseball language, but 3 up and 3 down. He would have check-ins with his coaches. And I love this. He would go to them each week and say, give me 3 things this week that were energizing to you based on, our relationship. Like, what did I do this week to help you? And what did I do this week? What were 3 things that actually pulled energy out of you? And I think you could do that with a 14-year-old. Just check in with them. What were 3 things or even high, low, like what went well today? What was not so good today? And just listen. And that relationship is going to foster connection versus we're in the same car, we're on our way to work. I'm on a call with Mike, and and they're in the back scrolling through their phone, and we're never connecting. Yeah. We're wondering why we don't have a relationship. I think sometimes we're just not intentional about that. So as almost the catcher mindset, like, you got everything in front of you. And I think there has to be times where we pull up and ask ourselves, what are we really trying to accomplish at work? You would do this at work. What am I trying to do at home? But I think so many people are uncomfortable at home. They don't know how to do this. And so their default actually becomes, I'm just going to go back to work because I get promoted there, I get paid there, I get a raise there, I got goals there, things that I can check the boxes. I go home, I'm not really sure if we're connecting at all. And so again, the book I thought would give people a way to think through, what do I do at home to build some relationships that we're talking about?
Man, yeah, there's so many places my head goes when you're sharing that, because I think having a target to shoot at one of the things you said I think is so key is it's so easy for us to have a target to shoot at work, because we have goals, we have sometimes we have a strategy that is put in front of us. But even as leaders, if you're a leader that's building your own business, you're creating that target. And it's so easy to do that at work, but being intentional at home sometimes gets missed because, like you said, like how do we create those targets at home? And so, what are some strategies or tactics, even just getting down to the brass tacks of it? How do we do that? How do we get intentional with creating a target at home?
That's a great question. Let me talk about the target here first, and then I'll give you an idea. So the target to me, so there's a guy on our team, the guy who he leads a lot of our operations. I tell the story about he kind of blew my mind one day. He had a daughter who was going into 9th grade, and she joined the archery team in Kentucky. He's from Kentucky, up in Lexington, and so Ella, his daughter, went to her first archery meet, and Scott we're in a boardroom for a company, and he draws a target on the wall, and this was fantastic. Nobody's in the room, just me and him. And he's showing me this, and he said, I started looking at this, and he said, when you hit the outside ring, I mean, think about an archery target, all these rings on the target, and he said, when you hit the outside ring on the target, you actually get points for that, and then he just starts narrowing the target or the focus of it, and you get more points here, more points here. You hit the bullseye in the middle, you get a lot of points. I mean, that's the force multiplier. We started talking to companies about being strategic versus being sporadic. I think most companies, they get it right sometimes, and you do get some points for that. But if you're not really focused on like what is strategic, we're going to leave points on the table. And I think at home, most of us don't even have a plan. We just hope we connect with somebody. We hope it goes okay. We hope our spouse is not upset. I mean, and Mark and I, Mark Miller and I, we work together all the time. Mark and I always say, hope is not a strategy. I mean,
exactly. Yeah. Right.
Maybe somebody will change, or maybe I'll get it right. That's not a strategy. We want to make sure that we're locked in with focus. Well, I ran across, I don't want to, freak everybody out here with any kind of religion, but I ran across the word sin. Yeah. And we all know, whether you're a religious person or not, we all heard the word sin. It means to do what we shouldn't do, or we don't do what we should do. It's a Bible word, right? We've heard this word. And I ran across a definition, and it said that it comes from a Greek word, which actually is an archery term that means to miss the target. And I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense. And I started thinking about this idea in a company. I'll tell a company, it's leadership sin to not even have a target. I mean, we sometimes we miss the target, but we're missing because we don't really even have, what are we shooting for? What is our goal? Yeah. And I think the thing is true at home. We don't even have a target. So back to your question here with that subtext of I love this idea of narrowing the focus. How would we do this? I'll give you one idea. I started asking myself the question, how would I need to live my life in such a way that the people who know me the best actually could love me the most? Now, that's a simple question, but there's some complexity behind it. It sounds almost simplistic if we're not careful. But I can ask myself that question, but now I got to do stuff. I've got to love. If I use that word, in this context, love is actually, I'm not seeing it just as a noun. I mean, we say I love you and we're in love and all that stuff. Love is actually a verb. It's like, what am I going to do to show up? And I'm going to, so now I'm getting into my tone of voice, and
Yeah.
am I listening first, and am I
Yeah.
encouraging more than I'm trying to fix somebody? And now I got all these conversations going with my teenagers if I have them. All this
Yeah.
stuff, you connecting these dots. And I think if we're not careful, the people who know us the best, this happens at work as well, by the way, the people who know us the best, if we're not careful, will actually respect us the least. I mean, they'll like, Dad, you say this at work and you're impressive there and all these people love you and you pay them and all that. But now when you come home, we're not connected at all, or with your spouse, husband, or your wife. I think it's so easy to take for granted the people that are closest to us.
So true.
And if you want to take this to another level, do the people around you not only love you, but I mean, we kind of, and I hate to use the word obligation with love, because that's not what love is actually, but we're in the same family. We're supposed to love each other. Do we like each other?
Yeah.
And now we're getting into, again, let's go back to our tone of voice. I jokingly say, but my wife has said this before, saying it louder, Randy, doesn't make you more right, but how many of us, we have this, I'm going to make my point, and now we've got disconnection again, and that's not what we want. And so I would just say to the listener, make sure you have a target, this focus. And for me, one of the simple ones was just, I asked myself this question: how can I live in such a way the people who know me the best love me the most? I think if you can ask yourself that question and start behaving accordingly, I mean, you got a chance of raising your kids and sending them out, and you did raise them not to keep them. You did raise them to send them out. Exactly. How cool would it be if they actually wanted to come home some after they leave because of relational connections that you have? And for most of us, if we don't pay attention to that, that's a gamble at best. I mean, but if we do this correctly, we actually can have those connections, and I think, some rich relationships down the road. I mean, you still get to send them home. We got all these little grandkids that are kind of fun with them, because they come and they have to go home with mom and dad.
You can send them away, right?
I can send them away, but they're a lot of fun to play with, and I think it's part of that is because we've really tried to have some connection with our kids. And I would say, I just would remind everybody, there are no perfect families. We've not always gotten this right. It's you start living with people for an extended period of time, there's going to be conflict. David, I can't get along myself half the time, much less all the people.
I got you, man.
This is I think this is a chance, though, for us to all narrow the target and the focus, and each person gets to decide what that looks like. But to not decide feels to me like it's just a forfeit of what could be.
Yeah, man, Randy, I love this idea of having that target, and the fact that, if we miss the mark, we're not even scoring. We're not even getting on, on the scoreboard. And I think that just having a target is, I honestly, I wished I would have had this book and this awareness 38 years ago, really. But I know that for me, one of the things that was really important was to have a mentor. And you, in the book, you use this idea of a mentor and someone who's maybe a little bit farther down the road to help the character. I think it's John, right? And the Willie is the mentor, and he's the baseball coach, and he's helping this guy to grapple with these ideas. How important is it to have a mentor, and then how do you go about finding somebody like that?
I think it's very important. I can't imagine where I would be had I not had people to look up to and to learn from. And I'll even say this: a mentor is, we'll talk about that. A mentor, though, is not always maybe positive, or who we learn from is not always positive. I mean, there are people around, you look at the way they do things and you go, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to do that. So I think you can learn from other people's mistakes. You don't have to make them all yourself. But I do think there's so much power in finding somebody who's positive around your life. I say positive, they're getting it right, or they appear to be getting it right. There are no perfect families. They'll tell you when you start talking to them, they're struggling as well. This thing is hard. Family life is a challenge for sure. But I just think there's a richness in knowing that you've got some support, you've got some people to hold you accountable, you got some people to look up to and learn from. And a mentor doesn't have to be somebody that I meet with every week for the rest of my life. I mean, I think sometimes we think our mentor is who we meet with all the time, and we may meet with them. I think it's great, but you don't have to have, this is not a Supreme Court justice appointment, right? It's not a lifetime.
Right. Lifetime, yeah.
This is where the seasons to me come back in. You're gonna have somebody you're gonna learn from right now, and you may have an area that let's say you're trying to work on your marriage right now. Well, you probably need to find somebody who's got some understanding or got some stuff together there, versus somebody who's maybe an expert on parent, maybe not an expert, but just somebody on parenting that they just have some of the connection we've been talking about. So it may be different. I would also say when we think about how do we find someone, I would identify 3 or 4 candidates based on what I'm trying to learn. And I would say, I would call them, and each one of them, and say, hey, would you be willing to meet with me? I'd love to buy you a cup of coffee. And I'd go with 5 or 6 questions about whatever the topic is, and really ask them, how do you do this? How do you think about this? Here's something I'm going through. But I do a lot of listening, and maybe make some notes, and you'll get some ideas and some things that you can try. And I think a family in so many ways is a lot more like a science experiment.
Right.
I mean, it'd be great if we're slicing baked cookies and everything.
Right.
And just do this, and it's all great. But it's more like a greenhouse, maybe is a better way to say it. And there's this organic thing going on. And so you're going to try stuff. This worked. Let's do more of that. This didn't work. I'm not going to do that again. All that kind of stuff. I think listening to people and getting those ideas is really powerful. I'll also say, you got to be receptive of their schedule. They may or may not be able to meet with you, and if they can't, move on to the next person on the list.
Sure.
But I start with, would you just be willing to meet with me 3 times? And it doesn't have to be a formal coaching kind of thing. It can just be an informal. I'd love to hang out with you a couple of times and ask you some questions. Go with questions, be prepared, and listen and learn and make some adjustments. I think is a powerful way. The last thing I'd say about a mentor is, for me, I've had formal mentors and people around. I've got people I look up to now. I mean, they're getting harder to find because I'm getting older, but you want to find people that are in your circle or sphere. But if you can't, you can also during seasons, or really all the time, if you think about it, you can learn through books. I mean, you can have a mentor that you may never meet, but they've got their ideas written down, and you have a chance to connect with them through their writing. And what you could do at that point, I'd love this idea is, and we've got some of this going on now with this, is I love 5 or 6 dads getting together and saying, we're going to read this together and we're going to talk through it together. And maybe they're not mentors, but they're on the same journey, and there's accountability built in there. It's almost like if you and I were workout partners and I knew you're going to show up at the gym, I'm probably more likely to come over there because I know like David's going to be there. He's counting on me. And so we get into this together. 100%. We start growing together. All of a sudden, we're more fit together than we are probably by ourselves. And so I think mentors, formal, somebody can teach us, yes, but I also don't miss the fact that you got some people around you, family and friends that you could tap into and you could learn and get on a journey together. And progress, I think, is accelerated when we've got a partner.
Boy, I can't agree more, because I just know earlier in my life, I had a partner who, you use the analogy of the workout partner. Boy, I tell you what, if I wasn't at the gym at 2:37 p.m., I was going to have heck to pay, man. Exactly. Where are you? Yeah. Exactly. Oh, man. Randy, I think this topic is so important and so great, and I really, really appreciate your insight on this. If there's somebody that's listening and they, maybe they're in that season of life when maybe they've got little kids that just life is really hectic and they're overwhelmed, what would be like maybe one piece of advice that you would give them, just kind of maybe even as a summary to thinking about winning at home? What advice would you give them?
You're making me think here. So I think this is I'm gonna make this a winning at life kind of thing, not necessarily at home, but I think it'll cover at home. So the first thing that comes to mind for me when I think about that is if we're not careful, because of technology especially, we're going to be tethered to a lot of noise. Yeah. And I've been thinking about this a lot the last few months. Noise is going to be on your schedule, whether you schedule it or not. You got little kids, there's noise. If you got a boss noise. You got email noise, detail noise, media noise, social media noise. I mean, it's just so much stuff going on.
Yeah.
What I've noticed in my own schedule is quiet won't show up on my schedule unless I schedule it.
Yeah.
And I can't give anybody who's listening more time, but I can remind them that if you don't ever spend any time in some quiet, and I'm not like check our email during quiet or let's catch up on social media. I'm talking like where you pull back and you really ask yourself, how am I doing?
Yeah.
This is a self-leadership piece. What's going on with me? And what do the people around me need? Maybe it's people on my team at work, but maybe it's my kid, my spouse. I've got to have some time where I pull back and ask myself, what am I really trying to do? Why does it matter? Where am I getting it right? I'm assessing. I'm adjusting. We just came out of the middle of summer here, and we're kind of halfway through the year.
Yep.
I like that. We had the NBA finals going on and all that. The basketball just ended. And when I think about that, the basketball coach always gets a halftime, right? All coaches get it. All doesn't, but a basketball or football coach gets a halftime. We're halfway through the year here. I think pulling back with some quiet, taking a time out and saying, I need to make some adjustments. I'm going to assess what happened in the first half. What do I want to do in the second half? Let's get back on that strategic, bullseye here in the second half. And I love the idea of trying to run the score up in the second half. Let's don't just say, I can't do this. I'll wait till Christmas and the beginning of the new year. And we got half a year in front of us to win at work, but to also win at home and to focus on some things. So that assess and adjust. I like that daily time to pull back. I'll sort of land the question here with this one thought. I was doing an event at Chick-fil-A here in Atlanta a few weeks ago, and I ran across a quote from Dan Cathy, who was the former CEO. Well, I saw Dan a few days ago, and I talked to him about what he had said. I'm like, I heard you say this. Talk to me about this a little more. And here's what he said. I thought this was so good. He said, and Dan's older than me. Dan's probably 70 plus. I mean, he's probably 70 at this point.
Okay.
Dan said, and he's retired. I say retired. Dan will never retire, but he's not running the business anymore. His son Andrew does. And Chick-fil-A is a great company, and Dan's done a fantastic job for a long time. His dad, Truett, started it. But Dan said, I'm asking myself these days a question. I thought this was so good. He said, my question for myself is, did my ears pop today? Meaning, if I'm not careful, I'll just grind away on the ground with all that I've got going on, and I'll never pull up. And when we go to the mountains, your ears pop as you start get up to altitude. Your ears start popping when you pull up. And you get to a higher place, but your ears won't pop again unless you come back down. And so Dan was explaining to me, I thought this was great. He's like, there's got to be times in my life where I'm pulling up and how am I doing? What am I trying to do? Why does it matter? Who do I need to help? All that stuff. And then there's times I need to be down doing the work. And I think that's true at work. That's why I say winning at life. I think that's true at work.
Yes.
We need to be thinking this way. We got to have some time for strategy and all that. If we're not careful, we'll just grind away in the business. And I always say, if we're not careful, we'll confuse activity with accomplishment.
Right.
I think the same thing's true at home. If we're not careful, we'll just be one more pattern. We're arguing again. It's not like it should be. And I'll just check out on that, or I'm going to let technology become my dominant default, and I'm just like, no, I think we've got to pull up and really check in and think if we can move back and forth from, sea level to maybe get on the balcony occasionally, just up and down. I like that visual there of trying to win at work and win at home. And I think you can win at both. I'll kind of close with just the reminder from the beginning, though. I think if you win at work and you lose at home, I think you still lose. So let's lock in here, leaders, and make sure we're doing what we can to win, I believe, where it matters most.
Yeah, man, I couldn't agree more, Randy. Man, thank you so much. I think this message is so powerful, so important, and it's really all about being intentional. And I think that being able to win both at work and at home, it's really where it's at. And so I'm so excited. I'm really grateful that you wrote this book, Winning Begins at Home. And I just want to encourage our listeners to go out and get a copy of this. How do people connect with you? How do they get a copy? If there's maybe there's somebody who has a team, how do they get a copy maybe for their whole team? Or maybe there's a group of dads that are listening that they think, man, this is a great way to be able to like talk about these things, because there are some great tools in the back of this book to give you some questions and some topics to tackle. How do they get a hold of that?
Yeah, so they can, I've got the book here. They can go to winningbeginsathome.com. We've got all kinds of stuff there, bonuses and offers and stuff to help people, but you can get the book there as well. We've created a course to go with it. I thought that was fun. Cool. It's a little, basically a course that we walk people through. So if some guys on a team or moms, wanted to watch this together and work through it together, they could do that. But that's where I would say just go to winningbeginsathome.com. The books are there, the course is there. I would say if you want to create a culture at your workplace where this is going on, that there's a chance for you. I mean, we got bulk orders there, you can get it, but we got organizations that are giving a copy to every team member, and they're beginning to talk about it. And then I just finally say, if we can help you organizationally as well, I mean, that's what we do mostly with our time. But we'd love to talk to you about how we might be able to help any organizations or teams out there are chasing high performance. But again, let's do all that stuff. That's great, but let's make sure we focus on the home side as well, because that, to me, that's where a lot of our joy comes from. I mean, we get joy at work as well. We should, but I don't want to have regret. And I think a lot of people, you've always heard, you're not going to regret if you don't spend more time at the office. And I think that really is probably true.
Yeah.
But I think, if we're not careful, we can miss really maybe the best part of our lives. So let's win from 5 to 9 as well.
I love that, Randy. That's so good. That's so good. Randy, thank you so much. Appreciate you being here. Thanks for sharing this message. And I hope all of our listeners go out, get a copy of the book. If you're leading a team, go get a copy for every person on your team, because I think that not only is it going to make their lives better, but it's going to make your organization and your team better as well. So, Randy, thanks again, my friend. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, David. I appreciate you having me on. Thanks for all you do, man.